Hola! The focus of today's video is cardinal numbers. Let's take a look. Alright, so cardinal numbers is just the official fancy name to talk about normal numbers that you use every day probably. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Those are all cardinal numbers. Ordinal numbers would be like saying first, second, third, fourth. So we want to make sure we've got those names straight. So cardinal is just straight numerals, just the numbers themselves. Most people know 1 through 10 in Spanish really well because they're used in pop culture. You might not have even taken a Spanish class and know these. So we've got uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco, seis, siete, ocho, nueve, diez. Now spelling-wise, a couple things we got to watch out for. First of all, uno is 1. But be aware because it ends in this O, that things could get a little tricky. So, for example, if I want to say 1 book, the O is actually going to disappear, and it will be un libro instead of uno libro. So the O disappears next to a noun. The other thing is it could be feminine. So if I want to say 1 magazine, I would say una revista. And again, that's only with uno that this happens. The other spelling things I want you to be aware of are the commonly misspelled numbers in this list. They are seis, siete, and diez. The thing that people get mixed up is the order of the E and the I, or I and E. So think of how these are pronounced. In 6 we say seis, seis. That E clearly comes first. If you misspelt it and you swap them, like this, like some of my students do, that would be like seis, which is not what we say. We say seis. Siete, we can hear the I first. Same thing with 10, diez. So we got to make sure that our pronunciation is really solid. Alright, so let's talk about some more numbers. So 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 are grouped by themselves because they have really unique spellings compared to the rest of the numbers you're going to see. So we've got once, doce, trece, catorce, quince. Ready for some more complex numbers? Alright, let's talk tens places. So tens places we've got over here. So we've got diez we've already seen. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, ciento. So again, spelling-wise, watching out for 20 and 30. Those are misspelled quite a lot. 40, remembering that, yes, in English we have a QU combo. In Spanish for this, it's CU that makes that sound with an A after it's cuarenta. Again, with 20 and 30, it's the EI combo that throws people off, so think of how you say it. Veinte. We don't say viente, we say veinte. So remember what order those vowels go in. The other thing to note in this list is you'll notice that for just 100 on the dot, we use cien. So if you have 100 magazines, cien revistas. But let's say you have more than 100, so like 106, that's when we switch to ciento. So it ends in an O and a T instead. Now, I don't want to just use plain old tens places and single digits. What else can I do to make these more interesting? Well, let's make some more complex numbers. So what happens if you want an actual combined number? So something like 43, 21, 95, etc. Well, literally all you have to do is take the individual numbers and put them in their places. So for example, if the highest number is something from its tens place, you'll have a tens place first, E, and then a ones place. If you have both a tens and a ones place, that's when you would insert and in Spanish. If you don't have a separate tens and ones place, we don't use it. So let's take a look at these samples. 43, that would be cuarenta y tres. So we have our tens place, cuarenta, and our ones place, tres. 21, veinte y uno. 95, noventa y cinco. 105, curveball, 105. But senora, why doesn't that have a Y in it? Where is the and? There's not one, because guess what? There's no tens place in this, so therefore, there's no and either. 137. Ooh, misspelled here. Fix that. Ciento, treinta, y siete. That would be our formal version. Now, 30, that's the tens place, siete, ones place, so we do need the and there in between the two, just like our formula up top. And that's how you make a more complex number. If the numbers get bigger, you just add more digits or something first before the tens place. You'll see what I mean in just a second. Before we move on to even bigger numbers, I want to talk about numbers 16 through 19 and 21 through 29, because these numbers and these numbers only in cardinal numbers in Spanish have two possible spellings. So for example, 16 you could do the separate places, so the tens place and the ones place, diez y seis. But in Spanish, the letter I makes a similar sound to a Y, right? So these could actually get lumped together. The Y becomes an I in the middle, and we merge the two. So diez y seis, all one. Notice how you pronounce it differently. You can hear the spaces here, diez y seis versus diez y seis. That's all one word. That happens for all of these. So we've got diez y siete, diez y siete. Diez y ocho, diez y ocho. Diez y nueve, diez y nueve. 20 y uno, 21. 20 y dos, 22. 20 y tres, 23. So just be aware that how you say it matters, because you might be saying this spelling versus this spelling. Now, what's the advantage? Well, these single spellings on the right are nice to say. It's just very flowy all combined. Spelling-wise, it's actually easier to keep them separate. Why? Well, because certain ones you got to watch out for have accent marks when they're combined. 16, 22, 23, and 26. When you practice with them, you just know that those ones have it. So E and seis at the end of 16, and again at 26, needs an accent. And then in 22 and 23, the end vowels as well. So the O and the E. So just be aware that you need to watch out for those accents if you choose the single spelling. And again, this only works for numbers 16 through 19 and 21 through 29 in Spanish. Again, because this E sound sounds like an I, and it'll work perfectly at the end of that word. It doesn't work for other tens places because you'll notice 20 is the only one that ends in E. So that's what makes this possible. And here, the Z and the C can be interchanged to make the single version, and the sounds maintain their original capacities. Alright, ones and tens places. We're experts now, so let's make it more interesting with some hundreds and even some bigger numbers, because you guys got this. This is easy peasy. Now, the nice part about hundreds, they're so easy. Look, you just have the word cientos, for the most part, with the number tacked on at the start. So if we want to say 200, easy. Just stick 2 in front of cientos, doscientos, all one word. Trescientos, cuatrocientos, quinientos, seiscientos, setecientos, ochocientos, novecientos. Pretty easy. The only ones that are different, 500, we watch out for that because it's got quinientos, and then the 7 version is missing its I. You would expect to be there. So just be aware. Now, because these end in OS, I also want to point out that if they are next to nouns, their gender could actually be feminine as well. So if you have 300 magazines, let's say, we would say 300 revistas. So the endings need to change to compensate for that. So just be aware that that happens. Now, why stop at 900? Let's get even cooler with the Spanish number knowledge. 1,000 would be mil. 2,000, dos mil. Isn't that handy? So you just literally stick dos in front of 1,000 as a separate word. Dos mil, 2,000. So if it was 5,000, it would be cinco mil, 2 separate words. 100,000, cien mil. 200,000, doscientos mil. So you can see how there's quite a nice pattern here, so that way you could actually make really big numbers without having to work too hard, as long as you know the basics. What are the tens places, 20s places, hundreds places, even up into the word 1,000, and then you're in really good shape. Now, a couple rules to note. We noted the gender change for cientos Now, if you're using those in any bigger numbers, such as 200,000, remember they can change, just watch out for that. Then the other thing that gets a little funky, we don't use un when we have the words cien, ciento, or mil. We don't put like un before any of those. So we don't say 100 people. We just say 100 personas, for example. There's no a in the Spanish version. Then, and this one always gets me, but it makes sense when you've seen uno before. Uno, like we saw in the previous pages, drops its O when it's before a noun. Like if you want to say one book, you say un libro, right? Well, that happens in any numbers that end in un, O, if there's a noun next. So, for example, 31, 31 años. So, because the word años is there, years, the O disappears and it becomes just un. So just be aware if it's followed up by a noun, this is what happens. If there's no noun here, if años wasn't present, well then we would leave it 31. So when would this happen? Well, if someone asks you, oh, how old are you? ¿Cuántos años tienes? If you just said 31, you'd say 31. But if you said 31 years, you'd have to say 31 años. If you do this with 21, remember that 21 through 29 have two spellings. If you use the shortened form, just be aware that you is going to get an accent, so it'll be like this. Like so, when the O disappears. So just a little thing to note. Alright, let's practice. Now, being able to do these bigger numbers is especially helpful so that you can tell the year. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a Spanish class, even at the college level, where a number comes up, a complex number, like year, 1977, and the person just either pauses and indefinitely just sits there without, knowing what to do until they get help from someone, or they say it in English instead of switching to Spanish. But it's so easy, you just break down the places. So you start with whatever's biggest, in this case the thousands, and then you just work your way down, so the hundreds and the tens and the ones place. So for example, if the thousands place here is only 1,000, that would be mil in Spanish, right? Then we move over to the next place. So we've got 900, and we know that to be 900. How do you say 70? That's our 10th place. 70. How do you say 7? 7. Now we do have a tens place and a ones place, and they're not combined, they're separate words, so we do need an and there at the end. So to say 1977 in Spanish, we'd say 1977. And that's how you would say that year. Isn't that great? Keep in mind that when you give the year in Spanish, it's always given as a complete year. So like I just said out the whole thing like this, that's how you would do it in Spanish. We don't say like 2020 like we would in English. I mean, you might hear it, but it's not a grammatical thing. Pause the video, try these other ones, and then see if you get those numbers right. Just so you notice, this one's actually a 1, not a 7. Give them a go. Let's see what we got. Alright, time to see how you did. Let's check this out. So, 2001. 2001. There's no tens place, so we can't use and like we did in the sample. So, 2001. 1832. 1832. We do have a tens and a ones place here, so and is appropriate. 2020. 2020. 568. 568. Now, did you notice this? 10,911. At first you might think those are sevens, but look, if we look at the top, between here and here, we can tell they match this, so therefore they are a 1. So we have 10,000, 10,000. 911. No and, because there's no separate 10 and 1s place here. And that, folks, is cardinal numbers in Spanish. So basically, you're in good shape if you memorize the tens, the 20s, the hundreds, and that you know how to say 1,000, which is mil. You memorize the couple rules that go along with numbers. And again, the more you practice these and push yourselves to use the higher numbers, the easier and more natural they will feel when you use them in speaking or in writing. Gracias, buena suerte, y nos vemos.